Today's mission is to use this to replace all of this. We've got a pretty messy wiring closet for our sprinkler controllers, and it happens to be in the master bedroom closet, which is really inconvenient. So eventually, I might even like to remove this entire box. But for now, I'd like to clean up all this wiring and replace these old sprinkler controllers that don't even keep the modern calendar, because if you set the date to today, it doesn't know which day of the week it is. And the biggest problem is that this switch has gotten all, well, unreliable. You move it just right and the whole system turns off. So I've got lots of wires to clean up. I've got to figure out if these wire interconnects are even necessary. And Rachio has a 16 zone sprinkler controller, which should be enough to eliminate both of these boxes and put everything all together. I didn't design this system. It was in a house that we bought, but it does have quite a lot of zones for trees and lawns and different areas. And fortunately, we have this really nice map that a friend of mine who was a surveyor drew up for us. And over time, we figured out where every single wire goes to, color by color, out to the sprinkler boxes. So that's definitely going to be a big help, having that all documented. And it'll pretty much let me just disconnect everything here and almost start as if it's a fresh install. But I'm going to go a little slower than that and go one by one and make sure I know what I'm disconnecting and see if there's any simplifications I can make and see how I can clean this up. At the end of the day, I should just have this one small box on the wall, but I'm going to do things with an eye towards potentially removing this entire enclosure one day. I removed the original sprinkler controllers, and there's an immense amount of room in here now. I also removed the connections to the individual sprinkler control solenoid valves. That's all of these from these blocks. I guess these would be like junction terminal blocks that let you select between a wire that's permanently connected up to the controller and a wire that goes out to the valve. I just don't know that I need this anymore. I think I may remove it and just run the individual sprinkler control wires into the new sprinkler controller without this intermediate step. It would certainly simplify the wiring and make everything just a little cleaner and one step closer to being able to remove this enclosure. So next thing is probably to remove those blocks and to start tying back any of the wires that aren't being used. I'm just going to tie them back onto their main cable. Like, you've got some pretty big bundles here, so I'm going to tie those back to make things simpler and then start untangling things with hopefully keeping these ground junctions intact. It would be nice just to reuse these. There's a whole bunch of ground wires. Each one of the main cable bundles that goes out to the yard has a green wire for the ground in that sprinkler box, and they all are joined together in these crimp connectors. So I may just keep these together so that I can have fewer connections to the new controller, but it does make it harder to sort these all out because they're all hooked together. So I may disconnect those if I need to. The instructions hopefully include this mounting template for drilling holes to accept the main body of the sprinkler controller. So I'm going to take off this last page here and mark some holes. One thing I really like about this R3 model is that they didn't try to reinvent the wheel, at least when it comes to the electrical connections. So this is 16 valves or 16 zones, but beyond that, if you compare it to the Orbit 12 zone controller that I'm replacing, all of the connections are almost identical, including even their labels in a lot of cases. So like S1, S2, those are the two rain sensors, which I had before. M is for the master valve. In this case, it was called pump before, same function, but 24 volts AC out, 24 volts AC out. I've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4 commons on the new one versus I only had 2 before. So that's even more convenient because I don't have to bundle up as many, common wires together before going to the controller. I have more slots where I can plug them in directly. And everything basically just unplugs from one and into the other, literally using the same types of connectors, the same screwdriver you've got out to release the cables here. Lets you release them if you put it in the wrong slot up here. Simple things like that don't seem like a big deal, but I think when it comes to smart home devices, it really drives me crazy when like everything gets changed just for the sake of change, versus here they intelligently came up with an interface that's not going to change and put all the smart stuff behind it. So all the wires that come out of your wall, they plug into the new one just like they plugged into the old one. They don't force you to make any changes that way. It's a small thing, but seems like really smart design. New controller's in and the wiring went really easily. I really like how this works. It's got a magnetic cover and all the guts are hidden behind there, but you can see that even without those intermediary junction blocks, the wiring actually works out a lot better. And I put some retainers along the big cables too, so that they're kind of kept where they need to be and there's no strain on the little clips in there. And next thing I want to do is move this router down inside. This was sitting up on top, which is great. It covers this corner of the house and a lot outside, but I think it'll do just as well from here as it did up here. So I'm going to build a little shelf for this to sit on, and that will kind of clean up this whole area and get all the equipment inside. I only have 2 outlets, and that's all I need now. One for the router, one for the sprinkler controller. So that's next. Perfect. I just can't believe how much stuff I pulled out of that wiring closet. Well, today the cabinet is made clean and I feel good about it. Much cleaner than before. I still like to get rid of this huge enclosure and make it even less obtrusive, but for today, I'm happy with that. Now, let's go set it up in the app. Okay, I'm going to launch the Rachio app for my iPhone, and you can see I already have my controller configured, but I'll go through setup again by hitting the plus button, then selecting sprinkler controller, then entering in my home address, and next I'll hit scan barcode, and that's going to open up the camera. Next I just need to scan the QR code behind the front cover on the controller itself, and this is a Rachio specific barcode, which is going to register the device to your app and configure Wi-Fi in the process. Note that this is not an Apple HomeKit barcode. I am primarily an Apple user, so I was disappointed to find out that Rachio no longer supports Apple HomeKit. I thought I was getting HomeKit support because I was misled by the copy on the website from the retailer I bought the controller from, and shame on me for not double checking, but the good news is that the native app is pretty good, and I'll show you a couple things that stood out at me. First off, weather's highly integrated into it, both from showing you the weather right in the app, and it also has automatic adjustments that are made that you can customize based on the weather, so that's pretty awesome. I also thought the initial setup was really good. I'm going to go to the zone tab, and you can see all the zones I've set up. Obviously, you can see a picture and a name for the different zones, and I thought that was brilliant to include the picture because in our household, there's multiple people that mess with the sprinkler system and run it, use it for different purposes, and so it's super obvious by having pictures to show where the water is going to flow. You don't really need to know the zone names. I don't think we had zone names that we agreed on until this point. So in any case, the setup is really easy. You can do one at a time, or you can use this wizard, and which is what I did initially. You go stand outside, you say, okay, zone 1, let's set it up. And I'm going to rerun the setup now. So I'll hit next for zone 1. The first thing it has you do is test the zone. So you tap on that button and water will start flowing. And this is where you can do the sanity check to make sure the area you're expecting to be watered is plugged into the port on the controller that you meant to plug it into. And there's no confusion that comes from getting this wrong initially. So you've established, yes, this is zone 1 watering, and it shuts the water back off. Here's where you can name it and take that picture and then hit next again, and then you just enter some basic information about what is growing there. In our case, it's fescue, cool season grass, standard spray head, and some clay soil, shade, and on a flat grade. And so that gets you started in terms of the adjustments to the water that's applied, and then of course you can customize it completely with your schedule and how often you water and how long you water. And another thing that you can do, if you have the ability to actually measure the flow that's going on, I'd highly encourage you to measure the flow and combine that with what you can get from this yard map feature. So this will let me estimate the square footage of different lawns. All you need to do is select the zone you already created and then draw polygons around that lawn. In this case, a rectangular square is pretty easy, but you can do irregular shapes too, and it will calculate an estimation of the square footage for the area that you encircled. And so that's pretty easy to set up. And then in my case, I'm using Flume, and Flume will tell me how much water is flowing through the system. And so once you have a flow number, you have the ability to figure out the actual quantity of water applied per square foot. And that lets you equalize the amount of water that you're applying on different areas that maybe have different sprinklers. Like in our case, we're inheriting an older system that has all different heads and such, and I've been standardizing, but they're still different. And so you can actually standardize the amount of water you're applying, assuming that you want those zones to be watered the same way. So that's just one nice thing. There's all kinds of customization in here for customizing how often and how long the water runs, and then the app will help you adjusting that seasonally or based on rain or weather. So I'm not going to go all the way deep into that, but I did want to point out that the app is decent. It's got lots of neat features to try out, and minimal, I know the word I want to say, but it's not appropriate to say here. There's a minimum amount of naggy upselling nonsense. There's no subscription required. It's not asking me to sign up my friends. You can go into a couple places where it's going to say, hey, do you want to try, for example, a soil health test? Okay, not a big deal. That actually is kind of helpful. But I'm not being sold a bunch of stuff, and so that's nice. Anyways, I wanted to show you just some raw experience from someone who was initially disappointed that there's no HomeKit support, but now I'm seeing that it would actually be difficult to shoehorn the irrigation-specific features that's in this app into the framework that Apple HomeKit supplies. So hopefully this was helpful, but there's lots more to check out. By the way, I looked in pretty deeply on why Rachio decided to drop support for HomeKit, and I gotta say I'm really impressed. You've got really good transparency from high-level people in the company, including the CTO, explaining every step of the way how they worked with Apple and their own hardware vendor and hired a firmware engineer and outside consultants and narrowed in on the problem, but weren't ultimately able to solve it on their own. And as someone who's written a bit of firmware, done a lot of QA automated testing, managed IoT devices, and been troubleshooting my whole career, I have to say this is tough stuff and they did a great job. Well, I'm totally happy with this Rachio sprinkler and irrigation controller. It's going to let us give our fruit trees the type of deep, long irrigation sets that they need without us having to remember to do that kind of scheduling we couldn't do before. And I've also got some spigots that are set up on irrigation timers, so it's going to help me run those effectively, as well as water our grass efficiently without wasting water. I think they made a really quality product, and I'm happy to recommend it, although I'm not affiliated in any way. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, hit that like button. If you've got questions, happy to answer those as well. But most of all, thanks a lot for watching.